Can you explain that?
Again, that is an entirely inaccurate presupposition. I do not have an enemies list. You can continue to characterize it as you wish. The only actions we take, generally speaking, for personnel at the FBI are ones based on merit and qualification and your ability to uphold your constitutional duty. You fall short, you don't work there anymore.
Well, there was a list. You don't like it to be called an enemies list, and it had about 60 names, and about 20 have had an adverse action. So those are, I think...
This may look like a tense exchange between a senator and a federal official, but it's actually a stress test of institutional integrity. What's really being tested here is whether the nation's top law enforcement agency is operating on neutral legal standards or drifting towards selective enforcement. This raises broader questions about how power is exercised when oversight meets executive authority. In this video, we'll break down what this confrontation reveals about transparency, due process, and the fragile trust that holds democratic institutions together.
Thank you, sir.
When you were here for your confirmation, we talked about your so-called enemies list. It appears to me that there have been adverse actions of various kinds taken against about 20 of the 60 people on your enemies list. You've been in office for 7 months. At that rate, you've got 14 months until you've hit all 60. Can you explain that?
Again, that is an entirely inaccurate presupposition. I do not have an enemies list. You can continue to characterize it as you wish. The only actions we take, generally speaking, for personnel at the FBI are ones based on merit and qualification and your ability to uphold your constitutional duty. You fall short, you don't work there anymore.
Well, there was a list. You don't like it to be called an enemies list, and it had about 60 names, and about 20 have had an adverse action. So those are, I think, pretty clear facts. Let me move on to your grand jury testimony, which we also talked about when you were here. I think you indicated that you understood that a witness in the grand jury is free to discuss afterwards whatever they told the grand jury. And you then went on to suggest, saying, I can't go into court orders granted by the D.C. District Chief Judge, and you want me to violate a court order. In those remarks, you fairly plainly suggested that there was a court order of some kind that somehow restricted or limited your ability to discuss your own testimony to that grand jury. Since then, that chief judge that you mentioned, Judge Boasberg, has written, and I'm quoting him here, Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E allows witnesses like Patel to divulge the contents of their testimony, meaning that nothing was preventing him from doing so before the committee. Can we confirm here today that there is no court order of any kind that limits your ability as a witness before the grand jury to discuss your own testimony to that grand jury?
We can confirm that pursuant to my action that grand jury testimony has been released, the transcript.
Let's, in what forum was it released, may I ask?
Publicly.
Okay, we'll check.
In that quiet but charged moment when Senator Sheldon Whitehouse asked, "Can you explain that?" the room seemed to narrow around a single uncomfortable truth. He was not just talking about a list. He was talking about a pattern that, to many watching, looked less like coincidence and more like consequence. Whitehouse laid it out with surgical precision. A list of roughly 60 names, a list Kash Patel once acknowledged, and in just 7 months, nearly 20 of those individuals had faced adverse actions. The math spoke for itself. And then came the denial. Calm, firm, and absolute. I do not have an enemies list, Patel said. Everything, he insisted, was about merit, qualifications, and constitutional duty. But in that exchange, something deeper was unfolding. Not just a disagreement over terminology, but a fundamental clash over how power is exercised and how truth is defined inside the American system. Because words matter. When you say enemies list, you are invoking a history that Americans know all too well. A history of institutions being turned inward, of authority being used not to protect the law, but to settle scores. Patel rejected that framing, but Whitehouse refused to let the facts be brushed aside. There was a list. There were names. and there were consequences that followed. In a democracy built on the idea that no one is above the law and no one is targeted by it, the appearance of selective enforcement is not a minor detail. It is a warning sign. It suggests a system drifting away from neutral justice and towards something far more dangerous: governance by loyalty and punishment. And then the conversation shifted, but the theme did not. Whitehouse turned to Patel's grand jury testimony, another moment where precision and accountability collide. Patel had previously suggested that some kind of court order prevented him from discussing his own testimony. It sounded to many like a shield, a way to avoid uncomfortable questions. But now the record had caught up. Judge Boasberg, the very chief judge Patel had referenced, made it clear, under federal rules, a witness is free to speak about what they told a grand jury. Nothing was stopping Patel from telling Congress or the American people what he had said. That revelation stripped away the ambiguity, and when Whitehouse asked for confirmation, was there any court order at all? Patel admitted the truth. The transcript had been released publicly. That single word, publicly, carried enormous weight. It meant the barrier Patel had implied was never really there. It meant the question was never about legal restriction, but about willingness. And in a democracy, the difference between those two things is everything. Laws can bind you, fear can silence you. But when a public official implies one to mask the other, trust erodes. Slowly at first, then all at once. What we witnessed in that exchange was not just a senator grilling a nominee or an official defending himself. It was a live demonstration of how fragile the line is between lawful authority and personal power. Whitehouse was not merely asking for explanations, he was asserting a principle. That in America, those who wield immense institutional influence must answer to facts, not narratives of their own making. Patel's responses, measured and legalistic, revealed a different philosophy, one where loyalty to a certain vision of leadership can override the messy transparency that democracy demands. This is what makes this moment resonate far beyond that hearing room. It is about how we define accountability in an era where institutions are under constant strain. When someone at the center of a powerful agency speaks of merit and constitutional duty, those words must be tested against actions, not just intentions. If adverse actions line up neatly with a previously acknowledged list of perceived opponents, the public has a right to ask whether justice is being applied evenly or whether it is being shaped by something else entirely. And there is something almost haunting about the rhythm of Whitehouse's questions. They were not loud, they were not theatrical, they were methodical. He let the timeline speak. 7 months, 20 people, 60 names, 14 months to go. It sounded less like a political jab and more like a ledger. A record of who rises and who falls when power is concentrated in too few hands. And in that calm arithmetic, a chilling possibility emerged, that the machinery of government could be quietly repurposed into a tool of alignment and removal. The grand jury exchange only sharpened that picture. When officials suggest that unseen legal barriers prevent transparency, and those barriers later dissolve under scrutiny, what remains is a question of credibility. Do we believe what we are being told, or do we believe the documents, the judges, and the rules that exist precisely to keep power honest? Judge Boasberg's words were not partisan. They were procedural. They were a reminder that even the most powerful figures are still bound by a system designed to protect openness and fairness. In moments like this, democracy reveals both its strength and its vulnerability. Its strength lies in the fact that a senator can confront an official, on the record, with uncomfortable facts. Its vulnerability lies in how easily narratives can be spun to blur those facts, to make accountability feel optional rather than essential. That tension is not abstract. It is alive in every hearing, every transcript, every carefully chosen phrase spoken into a microphone. And this is why what happened here matters. not because of one list or one testimony, but because of what they symbolize. They symbolize a struggle over the soul of American governance. Will institutions remain places where rules apply evenly, where transparency is not a favor but a requirement? Or will they become arenas where power decides who is worthy and who is disposable? As the hearing room lights dim and the microphones fall silent, those questions linger. They linger in the space between what was said and what was meant. They linger in the uneasy feeling that justice, once politicized, is difficult to reclaim. And they linger with every citizen who understands that democracy is not self-sustaining. It depends on vigilance. It depends on people willing to demand explanations, even when those explanations are uncomfortable. So remember that moment. Remember the calm voice asking, "Can you explain that?" Remember the denial, the clarification, and the final admission that the truth was already out in the open. Because in a system built on accountability, sunlight is not an enemy. It is the only thing that keeps the machinery from turning dark. If you believe in transparency, if you believe that power must answer to principle, then stay engaged. Watch closely. Demand better. And subscribe to Liberty Report USA to support the work of exposing the truth.